From TV to movies, how many of your favorite characters are minorities? Chances are that number is low. Today, teens consume an abundance of digital media, from film to television to web series. However, when it comes to the topic of minority representation in this media, there is noticeably more that can be done. Since the early days of television, minority underrepresentation has sparked debates and conversations, with many urging for more inclusivity. Has the media made efforts to include more minorities, or are they still not doing enough? Good morning, I am your host, Olnea, and I am joined by local Arizona high school students from Spot 127 Youth Media Center. Today, we will be considering minority representation in recent television and other media from a teen perspective on this episode of Spot On. We've all heard and seen about typical stereotypes in the media. Alex, why does the media seemingly continue to empower these stereotypes?
I think a lot of it has to do with what people are comfortable with. I think a lot of writers and directors, when they're contributing to media and they're trying to form their own TV shows or movies or just any type of media, some of them may not know how to represent certain people, so they just kind of choose to use certain stereotypes. And it's also because they know their audience. They know what they look to what their audience will expect and what their audience will be comfortable with and what will keep them watching. So by catering to a specific audience, they're able to perpetuate these different stereotypes that are harmful to minorities, but keep a certain demographic watching. So it's kind of just they want to make the most money as possible. And a lot of people just don't look deep enough into trying to accurately represent minorities.
Right. If people are already familiar with these stereotypes, movie makers and other media people will obviously be more inclined to use them. Charlie, what do you think about this?
I agree with Alex. I think just sticking to stereotypes with certain movies and TV shows is just sometimes easier to get your point across with the character and even the group of people. But sometimes it's good to open up new doors with maybe new characters or new groups, and opening up a new stereotype is not something we want to do, but having a different viewpoint and changing the stereotype around, making it different and having a new thing it's a lot easier to do. But having the media continue stereotypes, it's part of culture, and it shouldn't be, but it is. And I think having stereotypes there, sometimes it is comfortable, but sometimes it's not. And I think we need to change that.
Thank you, Charlie. How about you, Zion?
I think we have these kind of stereotypes for the same reason high schools and movies are jocks and nerds, and it's all nerds. It does not resemble high school, but it's just easy to write. It's the same reason we have minority stereotypes is the same reason we have other stereotypes, because making a good story, good characters, that's difficult and it takes time. And movies these days, unless you're really passionate, you can make a lot of money in it, and there's not a lot of passion in a lot of movies, especially the bigger media companies. They have literal equations to figure out the least amount of work they can do for the most amount of revenue. So just by filling your diversity quotas and picking stock characters, it's just easy to make fill your cast while making as much money as possible.
Yes, defaulting to these characters, unfortunately, and these stereotypes is unfortunately an easier way to make money and include less diverse and complex characters. Gavi, what do you think about this?
The people who are writing the scripts are rarely from that specific group that they're trying to write about. Whether it's the LGBTQ community or a specific group of people of color. So there's often a lot of inconsistencies in the characters because they only really go off of the stereotype that has been given to like these specific groups in the media, and it's just an easier way for them to get the most money with like the least amount of work possible, like Zion said.
Thank you, Gabby. So the Bechdel test is a well-known measure for woman representation in film. There are 3 basic requirements, but most films don't pass these. At least 2 women must have a conversation about something other than a man. Amelia, is the Bechdel test a realistic standard for media today?
Yeah, I think the Bechdel test is a great standard, and it's definitely realistic because it's so easy and so simple. The requirements are the bare minimum. It's not hard to write 2 named characters who have a conversation about something other than a man. But I do think that there are some movies where the Bechdel test isn't maybe the best test to give it. For example, The Outsiders doesn't pass the Bechdel test, but that's because the 2 female characters in that are not essential to the plot of the story. The plot of the story mainly revolves around the boys. It's their story, and it's not the female story. They don't have their own plot line to drive. They don't have their own arcs to have. So obviously, they're not going to be able to have a conversation that doesn't relate to the entire story. So I feel like overall, the Bechdel test is great if you want to write a story where a female is going to have her own either art or plot line separate from the males, or just have something else she's supposed to do besides driving the male's plot.
Yes, some movies definitely don't have storylines that will fit the Bechdel test. Sabrina, what do you think about this?
Going on with Amelia's point, The Outsiders is a story on boyhood and like finding yourself with kind of your chosen family and kind of a group of boys trying to bond. And I think we have to look at the type of story we're creating, because something like The Avengers doesn't pass the Bechdel test, but it should, because it's about a bunch of superheroes. And I think the point of The Avengers is, bad guys versus good guys. Yet, why aren't the females included in the good guys to the point where we're able to pass the Bechdel test? I would say that any movie that isn't completely centered around 2 boys, like Up, where it's a minimal cast and the storyline is kind of about a boy finding a father figure and an old man kind of finding something more to his life, I think that most movies should pass the Bechdel test. I don't think it should be a feminist requirement. I think it should just be a baseline for any movie like that. And I don't really think you can call a movie feminist or standing up for the female perspective when you're not having those females with those voices trying to say something. I think the Bechdel test really should be a standard in most media.
Thank you for your response. So, media can have a huge influence on children, helping to inspire them or entailing the development of stereotypes. That's why it's important for us to show accurate media to our younger generation. So where is minority representation in children's television? Does Disney produce enough accurate diversity? Ligaya?
Disney has definitely progressed along the years, considering their diversity in the Disney Princess. The Disney Princess is the biggest role model for a child watching television. So progressing from Snow White and Cinderella to having racial minorities like Moana, Mulan, and more recently Raya and Elena of Avalor. They've definitely increased their representation, which is good for young children to see that their ethnic background is not a hindrance to their life. It's something that's empowering and something that's very special and unique to them. But especially knowing that Disney is entirely a fictional universe, like having their princesses from races that technically don't exist but are based off of other races that exist in the real world is a great way to show that your personal heritage is not a stereotype for other white people and white privileged people to use in media. So that's kind of how Disney has progressed along the years.
Passing it on to Parker, what do you think?
I do think Disney does a good job with trying to represent the different minority groups surrounding race, gender, and ethnicity. When you look at The Princess and the Frog, that really kind of set the bar of what women can do, especially without a man. So I do think moving forward, Disney does a really good job in diversifying their content for children to watch.
Yes, we both agreed that Disney has been evolving in terms of diversity and more minority inclusivity. Amelia, any final thoughts?
So yeah, I do agree. Disney has definitely been doing a lot better recently on giving accurate, more diversity and accurate representations of that diversity in their films. And I feel like it's so important for kids to have that, because kids look at Disney films or other, children's films, and they kind of like use those as like role models for how they want to live their lives. And it's so much better to have someone who looks like them or who is like them or who acts like them for them to relate to, rather than them having to kind of grasp at like the tiny things that they can relate to in someone that they don't look like or act like or are like.
Right. Relatable characters in Disney and other films can definitely help kids feel more inspired. So that begs the question, can a non-minority person write a minority story? Zion.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think they can, because while a lot of minority struggles and stories are very specific to that kind of background, at the heart of it are very human experiences and emotions that we can, if we give enough empathy to, we can all relate to. And I definitely think I know, like Call Me by Your Name is like one of the most quintessential gay romance movies ever, and it includes very like specific struggles that a gay romance would involve, yet it was written by a straight person. And I think that a minority person can write a really, I think a gay person can write a really bad gay romance story, and I think you only need to look to Wattpad to find some of those. And like in the same way that you can like look back at like the Epic of Gilgamesh or the Odyssey and like find this empathy and the struggle and really relate to these characters that were like exist like thousands. These books were written thousands and thousands of years ago, or the same way that a writer can write a story about like superheroes or vampires, or like, I don't think that Christopher Nolan was at the Battle of Dunkirk, yet he made a really good movie about like what it was like to be there and the kind of like waiting and tension that was there. So it all depends on your research and empathy, and it goes back to whether you're a good writer or not, and whether or not you default to stereotypes.
Right. The universal human emotions that are shown in characters in media are things that everyone experiences, and they're very relatable. Amelia, what are your thoughts on this?
I agree. I feel like every human is capable of empathy and relating to things. So like you can relate to anything. You maybe not the best in the best way, or maybe not like I've experienced this exact same thing before, but you can find a way to relate to everything. So I feel like a non-minority person can definitely do the research and talk to the right people, educate themselves on what it's like to be that minority in order to write that minority story. And it's just about whether or not the person really tries and really educates themselves and really wants to put an accurate representation of that person in their story.
Thank you, Amelia. Charlie, what's your opinion on this?
I think a non-minority person can definitely write a minority story. You just have to look at like the facts of it, and like looking back to like the stereotypes and things. You don't want to always incorporate stereotypes. And back to what Zion was saying about Call Me by Your Name, that's one of I think, in my opinion, is one of the best gay romances that was created, especially the fact that he was a straight man who wrote it. I think the director did a great job in doing research and finding out like those little like pockets of like almost like perfect moments that he incorporated in the movie. And I think going back to having that minority understanding is really important, and doing research is very important part of it, because if you don't know what you're working with, you can like really mess it up, put in a ton of stereotypes. And so you just have to know what you're dealing with and like who you're working with, what the storyline is. You have to know what you're doing.
All of you agree that non-minorities can write minority stories as long as they're doing the research and identifying with the emotions, like using empathy, putting themselves in the character's shoes. So, Gabby, should roles be specifically written for minorities then?
You shouldn't put them in like a box, because they can be like all sorts of things, like a musician, a scholar, an educator, and things like that.
Zion, what do you think?
I think it kind of depends on the story you're trying to tell. Like, obviously, certain roles can only be filled by certain characters. Obviously, you can't have the main character in Get Out played by like a white dude, because that kind of ruins the whole point of the story. But I definitely think that Hollywood often defaults to stereotypes to fill their diversity quotas, or only assigns like certain stereotypes, like strict parents or poverty to only certain kinds of characters. And I think like a lot of people want to see the people that they identify with on the screen to fill like that more vast role of characters and roles. And like when they play those roles, obviously you can have like certain things like play into the background. Like obviously like a black man who's a professor is going to have a different experience than a white professor, but it doesn't all need, the entire story doesn't need to be all about how he's a black professor if the story doesn't call for that. Some people just want to see characters that they can identify with on the screen.
Thank you, Zion. Sabrina, what's your opinion?
Yeah, I strongly agree with what Zion was saying. I think that characters should have quirks that kind of show, oh, this character is this religion, or this character has this kind of effect on them because of their race. But that shouldn't be the whole story. I feel like I see too many LGBTQ plus characters, especially, always so depressed because of their sexuality or their gender dysphoria, whichever they are. And I think that shouldn't be a leading thing in those characters. I think that we should be able to see a character in a script just kiss their girlfriend, even though they're a girl. Like, it shouldn't be a big thing when you see those types of characters. There shouldn't be a big lead up, but there should be quirks behind it if we're going to have a full character. I don't think we should have quote unquote normal characters where they don't have where there's nothing that really says anything about who they are, because everything affects who you are. And I think that like being a different race or having a different religion or having a different sexuality will always affect you because you're against the norm of society. And so I think those quirks of that character should be involved, but that shouldn't be a stereotype and it shouldn't define the entire character. Diverse characters should be able to lead stories that don't revolve around their minority.
Yeah, we shouldn't default to those stereotypes, rather give more quirks, like you said, and traits to those characters. Rain, last but not least, what's your opinion?
There's so many things that set us apart, and none of them should really affect your options in a film. I feel like the role you play in a film should be determined by if you're a good actor and your character, and what sets you apart shouldn't matter. And I think you shouldn't be discriminated against and written a role because of what sets you apart. I feel like everyone should be treated the exact same.
Interesting. We have many contrasting opinions here. Zion, do you think cancel culture hinders discussion of progressiveness?
100%. I think cancel culture is kind of one of the worst examples of kind of fake activism or like aesthetic activism on social media, just because very little of it is driven by an actual wanting to improve society, and more of it is to like feel good about yourself, because in the society that we live in, like what we consume, like our iPhone screens are made by and made in concentration camps in China. Our coffee is picked by children getting paid literal pennies in Guatemala, and we're surrounded by so many problems, and it's kind of hard to feel like we're making progress in that. And I think that a lot of people turn to social media, and like if they call like a celebrity who made a small mistake on a talk show like a racist, or like if someone's genuinely trying to get educated on a topic, if they call them a racist, it makes them feel like they're contributing to the progress of society. And very few of them actually want that person to become a better person, to that person to move forward. They just want that little nugget of dopamine that makes them feel better. And I think it really hinders progress, because none of us are born, like feminist scholars or Black activist scholars. We all have to get there at some point. And I think all of us know how easy it is to get misled on social media, because you fall down the wrong internet rabbit hole. And you're not if you make a statement like 10 years ago, like that doesn't determine you for the rest of your life. People can change within like literal months. Like I think if you look at like criminal justice systems, you see like murderers become like philanthropists. Like people have such a capacity for change, and I think cancel culture denies that. And I also think it denies the chance for people to learn. Like imagine if you were in a classroom and if you got like a math problem wrong, instead of like your math teacher correcting you, your math teacher like called up your job and tried to get you fired from your job. Like it's such a hindrance to people who want to learn and who want to become better. And I think it really leads people to fall down the wrong rabbit hole just because they got called racist on Twitter. And I think it creates a really false dynamic and a really toxic dynamic.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate how cancel culture can hinder our progressiveness like that. Lagaya, what's your opinion on this?
Completely in agreement. Cancel culture uses primarily fear to stop people from making the wrong choices instead of allowing people to make mistakes and learn and grow and become a better person. So people will go their entire lives in fear of speaking out, in fear of, promoting, how they see something specifically. And cancel culture will say like, cancel culture will prevent them from making that mistake and prevent them from learning, and they'll never learn the true way on how to view a certain aspect in, minority representation. And it's just, it doesn't achieve the right amount of activism or it doesn't achieve the original goal of trying to improve society. It just makes everybody afraid, and it either goes too far or doesn't do enough, because the people who do keep on making mistakes without learning, cancel culture doesn't apply to them, because they keep pulling in entertainment and keep pulling in views and revenue. And cancel culture takes things the wrong way. It applies the wrong kind of accountability and responsibility.
Well, thank you both for voicing your opinions on this. Not easy. Have we really become more diverse in film, or have we just been having token films and our characters? Alessandra, what do you think?
I think that compared to like how a point was made earlier, that definitely the older Disney movies have a lot less representation, and now a lot more people are caring about the representation, and how little kids who are growing up can see these people that they look like and have similar struggles to, and look up to them like just throughout their life, like a small authority figure. And there's a lot more of that now, and it's definitely progressed over time.
Charlie, how about you?
I agree 100%. I think there's a lot more representation now than there was, but we still need to do a lot more research and representation, and we need to do better on that, even though we have progressed a lot, like a ton in the past, like probably 10, 15 years. And I think one of like a really, really good example is like animated films and live action films, like going to like Milan or something, like watching those two separate films. The animated one has a lot more, it does have culture, but it does have a culture like appropriation in it. And I think having to differentiate what's almost like biased in a way, having to figure those things out and put it in a movie is incredible. Like seeing how they took certain parts from the animated movie out and didn't put them in the new movie. Like they took Mishu out. Mishu is the little dragon. That's considered like almost, I think it's considered a culture appropriation for them. And so I think when they took that out, that was one of the biggest things that I noticed was they're really doing a lot better with how they represent cultures and how they like are showing kids what it's actually like.
Yeah, it seems like Disney is doing more on their part to include more culture accurate characters and reflect diversity. Elvis, what do you think about this?
Yeah, there's been a lot more diversity in films, animated films. Animated show that I can think off the top of my head is Steven Universe. That was a very progressive and diverse show, I think. I really liked it. And
moving on to Alex.
Yeah, I definitely agree with like, especially what Charlie said, even like, especially with like Mulan, it's like now all of these like movies and TV shows, people are like actually starting to educate themselves and look into what they want to put into their movies and like what representation they want to put and how they don't want to use, like they want to appreciate cultures instead of appropriating them. And I think there's been there's such an increase in diversity, but it's also like it has a long way to go because even though there is that increase in diversity, there are still a lot of stereotypes that are pushed on to these certain roles that people are given. And it just kind of creates this like atmosphere where people only expect certain stereotypes of people like in real life instead of just what they're seeing on TV.
Yes, although media has evolved to include more diverse and culturally accurate characters, it still has a lot more progress to do, making sure that they're not including stereotypes, like you mentioned, that will affect people's views of those characters and those minorities in real life. Diego, do you have any final thoughts on today's conversation?
Yeah, Olnea, like you just said, there has been improvement, but there is more we can do when it comes to these characters that we see in film and TV. And as previously mentioned, if writers try, minority or non-minority, they can create good minority stories if they have a good understanding and do their research. I think it's very important for kids of this generation to have that figure to look up to. You guys mentioned the Princess and the Frog and superheroes, which is very popular with children now that kids can look up to and point and say, you know, it's just like me, and it gives them hope and inspiration, I think is very important for our future.
Thank you, Diego. There's still a long way to go until equal representation and equity for minorities is achieved in the media. Nevertheless, it's necessary to continue having open conversations about these issues to reach the goal of equality. Unfortunately, this is all the time we have today for this conversation. I'd like to thank my guests for joining me today and you, the viewer, for tuning in. Please like and subscribe down below, and if you'd like to add to this conversation, please make a comment. From Spot 127, I'm Olnea, and this has been another episode of Spot On.